I've known since I was little that I'd have to fight harder than most just to have the basics. I grew up in a modest home in a small South Carolina town, where the wooden floor creaked with every step and the leaky roof sang sad lullabies on rainy nights. My mother was a seamstress. My father juggled 2 jobs to keep the fridge from going empty. We didn't have luxuries, but we had principles, and I carried those with me when I moved to the big city. I met Ethan while working at a local coffee shop. He came in one morning, ordered a cappuccino, and then realized he'd forgotten his wallet. I paid for it with the little I had and smiled like it was nothing, never imagining that small gesture would change the course of my life. The next day, he came back with the money and a bouquet of tiny flowers, saying no one had ever done something like that for him. That was the beginning. Simple, light, real. Ethan was kind, driven, and thoughtful. He always treated me like an equal, even after I found out he came from a wealthy family in Boston. I hesitated, not because I didn't trust him, but because I feared how his family would see someone like me. And well, I was right to worry. The first time I met his mother, Charlotte, I knew. Her handshake was firm, her smile polite but hollow. She wore pearls around her neck and sentences sharp as needles. She asked about my schooling, what my parents did, whether my family belonged to any respectable clubs. I answered calmly, but with each word, I could feel the invisible wall between us growing thicker. Over the next few months, things didn't get any better. When Ethan proposed and shared the news with her, Charlotte didn't congratulate us. She simply said, "I hope you know what you're doing," in that perfectly polished tone that made everything sound like a warning wrapped in sugar. Then came the whispers. Friends of Ethan, co-workers, even his mother's neighbors began hinting to me, in awkward tones and nervous glances, that Charlotte had been telling people I was just with him for his money, that I came from nothing and saw her son as a way to climb the social ladder, that I was a gold digger, plain and simple. I cried. A lot. Not because her words hurt, but because they reduced my love for Ethan to something transactional and fake. I thought about calling off the wedding. I even considered giving the ring back. But Ethan took my hands, looked me in the eye, and said, "You're going to be my wife. That's all that matters." And from that moment on, I knew I'd face anything for him. But life has its own way of setting the record straight. During the wedding planning, Ethan's father, Mr. Gregory, pulled me aside for a talk. He had always kept his distance, but something about him felt sincere. He told me Charlotte had been tightening her grip on the family's affairs ever since Ethan's grandfather died, leaving behind a significant fortune, and a mysterious will that no one had fully seen. At least, that's what everyone believed. Then, one overcast morning, just days before the wedding, Mr. Gregory handed me an envelope. "The truth needs to come out, Emma," he said quietly. "It's time you knew who's really been eyeing the family's inheritance." My hands trembled as I opened it. What I read inside changed everything. The document inside the envelope was a scanned copy of the original will, the one everyone had assumed was still tied up in legal reviews or held in secrecy by the family's legal advisors. But Mr. Gregory had it, and he had been keeping it not to protect himself, but to protect his son. It turned out that Ethan's grandfather, Henry Whitmore, had updated his will shortly before passing away. And contrary to what Charlotte had been implying for months, that Ethan stood to inherit a vast fortune and I, therefore, had targeted him, the will said something very different. The estate was to be divided into 4 parts. One part would go to a charity supporting underprivileged children in rural areas, something Mr. Whitmore had been passionate about. Another part would go to Mr. Gregory as his longtime business partner and son-in-law. The third part would be held in trust for any future grandchildren, and the fourth, the largest portion, would go to Charlotte. Only under one condition. She had to remain uninvolved in any legal or public interference regarding her son's private life, including his marriage. In plain words, if she continued trying to sabotage Ethan's relationship, she'd forfeit her share. That document alone was powerful. But there was more. Attached was a timeline. Notes. Evidence. It showed that for 2 full years, Charlotte had been pressuring the family's attorney to hide the addendum to the will. She didn't want anyone to know that her inheritance depended on her silence. Instead, she created the illusion that I was the threat, painting me as the greedy outsider, all while she was the one quietly trying to manipulate the family fortune. Mr. Gregory leaned back in his chair as I read in stunned silence. "I never agreed with her tactics," he said, "but I didn't know how deep it went until recently. I want Ethan to know the truth. And I want you to know you have nothing to prove to anyone." Tears welled up in my eyes, not out of sadness this time, but out of sheer exhaustion and a strange sense of justice. I had spent months defending myself, doubting myself, wondering if maybe love wasn't enough. But there it was, in black and white, the truth. When I told Ethan everything that night, he was quiet for a long time. Then he simply said, "She crossed the line." The next morning, he went to his parents' home. I wasn't there, but he told me what happened later. He showed her the will and confronted her calmly. She didn't deny any of it. Instead, she wept. Not because she was sorry, but because she had been caught. The wedding went on as planned, but with one notable absence. Charlotte didn't come. People whispered about it, of course. Some wondered why she had missed her only son's big day. Others probably assumed it was some petty family drama. Only a few close friends knew the truth, and they stood by us, smiling, as I walked down the aisle in a borrowed dress and hand-picked wildflowers. I remember looking at Ethan at the altar and thinking, I didn't just marry the man I love. I married a man who chose me over everything else, even comfort, even legacy, even his own mother's approval. And yet, the story didn't end there. Because a few weeks after the honeymoon, a letter arrived. Handwritten. From Charlotte. And what she wrote inside, well, I never could have expected it. The envelope was cream-colored, thick and elegant, with my name written in Charlotte's careful cursive. I stared at it for a while before opening it. Ethan was in the shower, and a part of me wanted to wait for him, but curiosity got the better of me. I sat at the kitchen table, heart pounding, and broke the wax seal. Inside was a single sheet of stationery. No long introduction. No warm greetings. Just her words. Calculated, composed, and yet different. "Emma, I've spent the last few weeks thinking. I'm not proud of what I've done. When you come from a world like mine, you're taught to protect your status, your assets, your name. I confused control with love. You didn't steal my son, you grounded him. I saw how much he changed around you. He laughed more, he challenged me more, and for a while I thought you were turning him against me. But I see now. You helped him become a man." I paused, my eyes blurred with tears I didn't want to admit were there. I kept reading. "I can't undo what I said. I know I hurt you. Maybe that's something you'll never fully forgive, and I don't blame you. But I don't want my first grandchild to grow up hearing whispers about a bitter old woman who tried to ruin her son's life. I want to do better. If you'll let me, I'd like to start over, not with apologies, but with actions." There was no signature, just a postscript at the bottom. "P.S. There's something else you should know. About the trust. About why I was so desperate. Ask Gregory." That last line stopped me cold. When Ethan came into the kitchen moments later, drying his hair, I handed him the letter without saying a word. He read it silently, then met my gaze. "That last part. That's not normal," he said, eyebrows drawn tight. He called his father that afternoon. The next day, we met Mr. Gregory at a quiet cafe outside the city. He looked tired, worn even, but he didn't hesitate when Ethan asked, "What was she talking about?" Gregory sighed. "Your grandfather's will didn't just set conditions on Charlotte. There was another clause, hidden at the very bottom of the addendum. If Charlotte forfeited her inheritance due to interference, her portion would automatically go to someone else in the family." I blinked. "To who?" "To you," Gregory said, eyes on me. I froze. "Me? Yes. Henry saw something in you, Emma. After your second meeting with him, which you probably didn't even know was a test, he told me you reminded him of his own wife. Resilient. Honest. He added that Claus himself, against Charlotte's wishes, said if she ever tried to destroy something real out of pride or greed, she didn't deserve the money. And he wanted it to go to the one person who would never expect it, the one he knew would never chase it. I was speechless. I had never asked for a penny from that family. Never hinted, never demanded, never even dreamed of it. But somehow, the very man who built their empire had seen me, really seen me, in just one conversation. And suddenly, the entire narrative that Charlotte had tried to build around me crumbled like dry leaves in the wind. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table. I could feel his pulse racing with mine. I didn't want the money. That wasn't why I married Ethan. But now, I held a power I hadn't asked for, and with it, a choice I never thought I'd have to make. Forgive her, or expose her, take what was mine, or prove that I never needed it. But then something else happened, something no one saw coming. Charlotte showed up at our door. And this time, she wasn't alone. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when the doorbell rang. Ethan was out running errands, and I was curled up on the couch with a book and a blanket, still processing everything Mr. Gregory had told us the day before. I wasn't expecting anyone, certainly not her. But when I opened the door, there she was. Charlotte stood on our front porch, dressed far simpler than I'd ever seen her before. No pearls, no dramatic scarf draped over her shoulders, just a plain navy coat and her silver hair pinned back in a neat bun. Her posture was upright, but not rigid, and beside her stood a little boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, with sandy blonde hair and soft brown eyes that looked a little too familiar. "I know this is unexpected," she said calmly, "but I thought it was time you met Nathaniel." I blinked. "Nathaniel." "My grandson," she said, then paused. "From Ethan's half-brother." I hadn't even known Ethan had a half-brother. But the boy looked up at me and gave a shy smile that melted my confusion just long enough for Charlotte to continue. Ethan's father had another child, from a relationship before we met. I knew about him, but Henry, he chose to support the child quietly. Nathaniel's mother passed away last year, and when Henry died, she asked me to look after him. I refused. I told myself it wasn't my place. Her voice faltered. But now, with everything that's happened, I realize how wrong I was. I stepped aside and invited them in. She didn't ask to sit. She didn't wonder or comment on the decoration. She just stood in the center of our small, warm living room, holding Nathaniel's hand. I noticed she didn't grip him tightly. She held it loosely, letting him explore, letting him breathe. It was such a small gesture, but it said everything. "I've spent most of my life trying to control things," she said, her voice lower now. "People, outcomes, appearances. And for what? I lost your trust. I almost lost my son. And I almost lost the chance to know someone like you." That part hit hard. I didn't know whether to feel vindicated or sad. Probably both. "I don't expect forgiveness," she added, "and I'm not here to plead. I just wanted you to know I've made arrangements to give up my share of the inheritance. I signed the release yesterday. It's yours now as Henry intended." I felt my knees weaken slightly. I sat down on the armrest of a couch, blinking back disbelief. "But I'm not here because of money," she said softly. "I'm here because I'd like to rebuild something. Slowly, if you'll let me. For Ethan. For Nathaniel. And maybe for all of us." At that moment, Nathaniel walked over to the bookshelf and picked up a photo of me and Ethan from our engagement party. "You look happy," he said with innocent eyes. I smiled. "We were." "I hope you're still happy," he said. "Grandma says people can change if they want to. Out of the mouths of babes, right?" I looked at Charlotte. She looked exhausted, humbled, but also sincere. I didn't respond right away. I didn't say I forgive you. That would take time. But I did kneel down and hold Nathaniel's hand. "Would you like some cocoa?" I asked him. His eyes lit up. "With marshmallows?" "Of course." I looked back at Charlotte. She nodded, silently thanking me. There was no dramatic apology, no emotional breakdown. Just a quiet shift. A beginning. Weeks later, Ethan and I would sit down and decide together how to use the inheritance. We didn't want mansions or yachts. Instead, we opened a community center for children like Nathaniel, kids who didn't have perfect starts in life but deserved a chance at something better. We named it Whitmore House. And Charlotte, she volunteers there every Friday afternoon. Some still whisper that I lucked out by marrying into a wealthy family, that I was a gold digger who somehow played the long game. But I don't argue with them. I just smile, because only Ethan and I, and now Nathaniel, truly know the journey we took. And we know that love, real love, doesn't come with a price tag. It comes with patience, truth, and the courage to stand tall when others try to tear you down.